The last thing I remember before going under anesthesia was Rachel squeezing my hand and whispering, "I'll be right here when you wake up." 8 hours later, I opened my eyes to find an empty chair beside my hospital bed and a note that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved for 12 years. The note was brief, clinical, like something she'd write in one of her administrative reports at the hospital. "David, I can't do this anymore. Marcus and I are leaving for Denver tonight. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce papers. Take care of yourself." No explanation, no apology, just cold, calculated abandonment when I needed her most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that my wife, who worked in hospital administration and had seen countless families rally around their loved ones during medical crises, had chosen the moment I was most vulnerable to walk away, as I lay there staring. At that note, my surgical incision burning with each breath, I realized that the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation crushing my chest. The woman who had promised to stand by me in sickness and in health had fled the moment sickness actually arrived. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in our Naperville home, except for the nervous energy that comes with knowing your life might change forever. I'd been putting off the surgery for months, hoping the chronic back pain from an old construction accident would somehow resolve itself. But when I could barely walk without wincing, Rachel finally convinced me to listen to Dr. Vasquez's recommendation for spinal fusion surgery. "It's going to be fine," Rachel had said that morning, adjusting my hospital bracelet with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. Her auburn hair was pulled back in its usual professional bun, and she wore her navy blazer, the one she always wore to important meetings at Chicago General Hospital, where she managed the administrative staff. "Dr. Vasquez is one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the city. You'll be back on your feet in no time." I remember studying her face. That morning, I was looking for any sign of the warmth that had drawn me to her 15 years ago when we met at Northwestern University. Rachel Martinez had been studying healthcare administration while I was grinding through my accounting degree. She was ambitious, driven, always talking about making healthcare more efficient and accessible. I admired her passion, her certainty about where she was going in life. Where I saw numbers and spreadsheets, she saw systems that could help people heal. Back then, she would light up when talking about her future career, her eyes sparkling with genuine care for patients and their families. She wanted to be the person who made sure no one fell through the cracks, that every patient received the support they needed during their most difficult moments. It was one of the things I loved most about her, that combination of professional competence and deep compassion. But that morning, as she drove me to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, there was something different about her demeanor. She kept checking her phone at red lights, and when I asked if everything was okay at work, she gave me a tight smile and said Marcus had some urgent budget reports that needed her attention. Marcus Chen was her department colleague, recently transferred from the Denver branch of the hospital system. She'd mentioned him frequently over the past few months, always in the context of work projects and administrative initiatives. "He's really helping streamline our patient intake processes," she'd explain when his name came up. The Denver team had developed these innovative protocols that we're adapting here in Chicago. I appreciated that Rachel had found a colleague who shared her passion for healthcare efficiency. In my own work at Morrison & Associates, I knew how valuable it was to have someone who understood your professional vision. The pre-surgery routine felt surreal. Rachel sat beside me in the pre-op area, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand while scrolling through emails on her phone. Nurses came and went, explaining procedures and asking me to sign consent forms. Dr. Vasquez stopped by to review the surgical plan one more time, confident manner, reassuring both of us that this was routine, something she'd done hundreds of times before. "The surgery should take about 6 to 8 hours, Dr. Vasquez explained, directing her comments to both Rachel and me. "We'll be fusing 3 vertebrae and inserting titanium rods to stabilize David's spine. Recovery will be gradual, but with proper physical therapy, he should regain full mobility within 6 months. Rachel nodded, asking the kinds of detailed questions I'd expect from someone in her profession. She wanted to know about pain management protocols, physical therapy timelines, and potential complications. Her clinical approach was actually comforting. It felt like having a healthcare advocate in my corner, someone who understood the medical system and could navigate it effectively. "I'll be in the family waiting area the entire time," Rachel assured Dr. Vasquez. "Please keep me updated on his progress." The surgeon promised to check in every few hours and provide a detailed update once the procedure was complete. Wheeled me toward the operating room. Rachel walked alongside the gurney, her hand resting on my arm. "I love you," she said, leaning down to kiss my forehead.
Oh.
"See you when you wake up." Those words echoed in my mind as the anesthesia took hold, a promise that anchored me as consciousness slipped away. The surgery itself was a blur of medical precision that I would only understand later. Through Dr. Vasquez's detailed explanation, while I was unconscious, she and her team spent 7 hours carefully realigning my vertebrae, removing damaged tissue, and installing the titanium hardware that would support my spine for the rest of my life. It was delicate work, requiring millimeter precision to avoid nerve damage while creating a stable foundation for healing. But as my body was being repaired on the operating table, my marriage was quietly dissolving in the waiting area above. While Dr. Vasquez was installing titanium rods in my spine, Rachel was apparently making final arrangements for her new life with Marcus. While medical professionals were fighting to give me a pain-free future, my wife was walking away from our shared past and toward a future that didn't include me. I learned later from my sister Lisa, who arrived at the hospital 3 hours into my surgery, that Rachel had seemed increasingly agitated as the afternoon wore on. Lisa found her pacing in the family waiting area, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When Lisa approached to introduce herself and offer support, Rachel had been polite but distant, explaining that she was handling some work emergencies and might need to step out briefly. She kept checking her watch, Lisa told me weeks later when I was strong enough to hear the details. And every time Dr. Vasquez's assistant came out to give updates, Rachel seemed more anxious rather than relieved. It was like she was waiting for something else entirely. What Rachel was waiting for, apparently, was confirmation that Marcus had finalized their travel arrangements to Denver. While I was fighting for my health on the operating table, she was coordinating her escape plan. The woman who had built her career on supporting patients and families during medical crises was abandoning her own family during ours. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me later. Rochelle had spent years developing protocols to ensure that patients never felt alone or unsupported during their hospital stays. She had created systems to make sure families had comfortable places to wait, regular updates from medical staff, and access to resources that would help them cope with difficult situations. She understood better than most people how important it was for patients to have emotional support during recovery. Yet when it came to her own husband, her own marriage, she chose the moment of my greatest vulnerability to disappear. The same woman who would have been horrified if a colleague abandoned their patient chose to abandon me when I needed her most. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel ever could. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, in those first hours after surgery, I kept reaching for her hand, expecting to find her fingers intertwined with mine. Each time I found only empty space, I assumed she was just taking a bathroom break or grabbing coffee. The nursing staff was wonderful, checking on me regularly and adjusting my pain medication. But I kept asking when my wife would be back. It wasn't until the next morning, when the fog of anesthesia finally cleared completely, that I found the note tucked under the water pitcher on my bedside table. The handwriting was unmistakably Rachel's, neat, precise, the same writing that had filled countless birthday cards and love letters over the years. But the words themselves felt like they came from a stranger. The note was written on Chicago General Hospital letterhead, as if she'd composed it during a work break rather than a marriage-ending moment. There was no emotion in the words, no acknowledgement of what we'd shared or what she was throwing away. It read like a resignation letter rather than a goodbye from the woman I'd planned to spend my life with. "David, I can't do this anymore. Marcus and I are leaving for Denver tonight. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce papers. Take care of yourself." 24 words to end 12 years of marriage. 24 words to explain why she wasn't there when I woke up from the most significant surgery of my life.
Ow.
Words to justify abandoning the man she'd promised to love, in sickness and in health. As I read and reread that note, the physical pain from my surgery seemed to fade into the background. The titanium rods in my spine would heal properly, Dr. Todd. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, Vasquez assured me. But the damage Rachel had done to my heart felt irreparable. The woman I trusted with my future had stolen it while I slept, leaving nothing but a clinical note and an empty chair where love used to sit. The nursing staff tried to maintain their professional composure when I asked about my wife's whereabouts, but I could see the confusion and concern in their eyes. They'd been expecting to coordinate my care with a supportive spouse, not navigate the aftermath of an abandonment. It was clear from their careful questions that this situation was outside their normal experience. Even in a hospital where they'd seen countless family crises, that first day was a haze of physical discomfort and emotional devastation. Every time someone asked about Rachel, I had to explain that she was gone, that I was facing recovery alone. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like I was describing someone else's life rather than my own. How do you explain to medical professionals that your wife, who works in healthcare and understands the importance of family support during recovery, chose to abandon you during your greatest need? The note sat on my bedside table like evidence of a crime, proof that the woman I'd loved and trusted had committed the ultimate betrayal. As I stared at it through the haze of pain medication, I began to realize that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a completely different life, one I'd never planned for or imagined. The surgery had been intended to fix my back and eliminate years of chronic pain. Instead, it had revealed a different kind of damage, one that cut much deeper than any physical injury ever could. The second day in the hospital brought a parade of visitors that made Rachel's absence even more glaring. My sister Lisa arrived first thing in the morning with homemade soup and a fierce determination to fill the void left by my missing wife. She bustled around my room, adjusting pillows and interrogating nurses about my pain medication schedule with the intensity of someone trying to compensate for an unforgivable absence. "Where exactly did Rachel go?" Lisa asked for the third time, her voice carrying that particular edge she got when someone in our family had been wronged. I showed her the note again, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and protective fury. Lisa had never been Rachel's biggest fan, often commenting that my wife seemed more invested in her career than her marriage. But even she was shocked by this level of abandonment. James arrived around noon, bringing news from Morrison, and associates and a stack of get-well cards from my colleagues. My best friend since college took one look at the empty visitor chair and the clinical note on my bedside table and immediately understood the situation without need for explanation. James had been my best man at the wedding 12 years ago, had watched Rachel and me navigate the ups and downs of marriage, and had often commented on how lucky I was to have found someone so dedicated and reliable. "I can't believe she's actually gone," James said quietly, settling into the chair Rachel should have occupied. "Even when things were tense between you two, I never thought she'd do something like this." His words hit me like a physical blow, because they confirmed something I'd been trying to ignore for months. Things had been tense between Rachel and me, subtle shifts in our relationship that I'd attributed to work stress and the chronic pain that had been affecting my mood. As I lay there listening to James recount office gossip and Lisa fuss over my meal tray, I began to replay the past few months with new clarity. The signs had been there, I realized, but I'd been too focused on my own physical discomfort to recognize them. Rachel had been working longer hours, coming home later, and later with stories about budget meetings and administrative restructuring. She'd been taking more phone calls in the evening, always stepping into another room and speaking in hushed tones about work emergencies. The name Marcus had appeared in her conversations with increasing frequency, always in professional contexts that seemed to require evening consultations and weekend planning sessions. "Marcus thinks we should revise the patient intake protocols," she'd say over dinner. "Marcus has some interesting ideas about staff scheduling efficiency." At the time, I'd been grateful that she had a colleague who shared her passion for healthcare administration. Now I wondered how long those professional discussions had been covering something more personal. Dr. Vasquez stopped by during her evening rounds, pleased with my surgical recovery, but concerned about my emotional state. Pain management isn't just about the physical aspects, she explained gently. Emotional stress can significantly impact healing. Is there someone we can call to provide additional support during your recovery? The question hung in the air awkwardly, highlighting the absence that everyone was trying not to address directly. My wife works in hospital administration, I found myself saying, then immediately correcting, worked in hospital administration. She's no longer available. Dr. Vasquez nodded professionally, making a note in my chart that probably indicated the need for additional psychological support during recovery. Even medical professionals who dealt with family crises regularly seemed unsure how to handle a spouse who abandoned their partner during surgery. That night, as the hospital settled into its quiet evening rhythm, I couldn't escape the mounting realization that Rachel's departure hadn't been impulsive. The note was too prepared, too decisive to have been written in a moment of panic or overwhelm. This had been planned, coordinated, timed to coincide with my period of maximum vulnerability. While I'd been worrying about surgical risks and recovery timelines, she'd been calculating the best moment to escape our marriage. The cruelest part was remembering our conversations about the surgery itself. Rachel had encouraged me to schedule the procedure, had researched Dr. Vasquez's credentials, had taken time off work to be present during the operation. She'd been supportive and engaged in ways that made me feel lucky to have such a caring, knowledgeable partner. Now I wondered if her encouragement had been motivated by genuine concern for my health or by the opportunity it provided for a clean break from our relationship. Over the next few days, as my body slowly began healing from the surgery, my mind couldn't stop analyzing every interaction I'd had with Rachel in recent months. The physical therapy sessions she'd missed because of work emergencies, the weekend getaway we'd postponed because Marcus needed help with a critical project, the anniversary dinner that had been interrupted by urgent phone calls from the hospital. That, looking back, seemed oddly timed and unnecessarily frequent. Lisa brought me Rachel's laptop from home, thinking I might want to handle some financial matters online during my recovery. When I opened it, I found browser history that told a story I hadn't been prepared to discover. Travel websites with searches for Denver apartments, restaurant reviews for romantic spots in the Colorado mountains, flight comparisons for 2 passengers departing Chicago on the exact day of my surgery. The evidence was overwhelming and devastating. While I'd been preparing for surgery, Rachel had been preparing for escape. While I'd been worrying about post-operative complications, she'd been booking flights to her new life. The woman who had promised to support me through my medical crisis had been using that crisis as cover for her betrayal. But the most painful discovery came when I found email drafts she'd never sent, messages to friends and family explaining her decision to leave. In these unsent letters, Rachel described feeling trapped in a marriage that had grown stagnant, suffocated by my chronic pain and the limitations it placed on our social life. She wrote about Marcus as someone who understood her professional ambitions, who shared her vision for healthcare innovation, who made her feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Reading those drafts felt like discovering that the woman I'd loved for 12 years had been a stranger for much longer than I'd realized. The Rachel who wrote about feeling trapped and suffocated was someone I'd never met. Someone who had apparently been hiding behind the facade of the supportive, dedicated wife I thought I knew. She'd been planning her escape while helping me, plan my recovery, coordinating her departure while coordinating my care. The physical pain from surgery was manageable with medication, but the emotional pain of these discoveries seemed to intensify each day. Every nurse who asked about my family, every form that requested emergency contact information, every meal that arrived for one person instead of 2 served as a reminder that I was facing recovery alone. The woman who should have been my primary support system had engineered her absence with the same efficiency she brought to hospital administration. My work colleagues began visiting regularly, bringing updates from Morrison and Associates in genuine concern for my well-being. It was touching to realize how many people cared about my recovery, how many relationships I'd built over the years that remained solid even when my marriage had crumbled. But their kindness also highlighted the magnitude of Rachel's betrayal. If coworkers and casual friends could make time to support me during recovery, what did it say about my wife that she couldn't? The nurses began treating me with a gentleness that went beyond professional courtesy, clearly recognizing that I was dealing with more than surgical recovery. They would linger during routine checks, asking about my pain levels in ways that seemed to encompass both physical and emotional discomfort. Their compassion was genuine and appreciated. But it also served as a constant reminder that the person who should have been providing intimate, personal care had chosen to provide none at all. Sleep became elusive as my mind raced through months of memories, reinterpreting conversations and events through the lens of Rachel's betrayal. The work trips that had seemed routine now appeared suspicious. The evenings she'd spent at the hospital for administrative meetings now seemed like cover stories. The growing distance in our physical relationship, which I'd attributed to stress and my chronic pain, now seemed like evidence of her emotional departure long before her physical one. By the end of my first week in the hospital, I'd moved through the initial shock of Rachel's abandonment into a deeper, more painful recognition of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. This wasn't a wife who had panicked during a medical crisis and made a terrible mistake. This was a woman who had methodically planned her escape, using my surgery as the perfect cover for her betrayal. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was calculated, designed to leave me with no ability to argue, pursue, or change her mind. The most devastating realization was that Rachel understood exactly how cruel her timing was. As someone who worked in healthcare, she knew better than most people how important family support was during recovery. She'd seen countless patients struggle with medical challenges, developed policies to ensure their emotional needs were met along with their physical ones. She knew that abandoning someone during surgery was among the most heartless things a spouse could do, and she'd done it anyway. Physical therapy began during my second week in the hospital, introducing me to Sarah Williams, a woman whose presence would gradually transform my understanding of what genuine care looked like. Sarah was the complete opposite of Rachel in almost every way. Where my wife had been all sharp efficiency and clinical detachment, Sarah radiated warmth and authentic compassion. She was probably in her early 30s, with short blonde hair that always seemed slightly tousled, and eyes that crinkled when she smiled, which was often. "So, David," Sarah said during our first session, reviewing my chart with the same thoroughness Rachel might have brought to administrative paperwork, but with an entirely different energy. "Dr. Vasquez says you're healing beautifully from the surgery, but we need to work on getting you mobile again. The goal isn't just to walk without pain, it's to help you reclaim your life." Her words carried a weight that went beyond physical rehabilitation, as if she understood that I was recovering from more than just spinal surgery. Sarah's approach to physical therapy was methodical but encouraging, pushing me to attempt movements that felt impossible while somehow making me believe they were achievable. She explained each exercise in detail, helping me understand how the healing process worked and what milestones I should expect to reach. Unlike Rachel's clinical knowledge, which had always felt distant and theoretical, Sarah's expertise was hands-on and immediately applicable to my daily experience. "Recovery isn't linear," Sarah explained during one particularly difficult session. "When I was frustrated by my lack of progress, some days you'll feel stronger, some days weaker. The key is consistency and patience with yourself." She was talking about physical healing, but her words seemed to apply to the emotional wounds I was nursing as well. Each day brought small victories mixed with setbacks, progress measured in inches rather than miles. What struck me most about Sarah was her genuine investment in my recovery. She remembered details from previous sessions, asked about my pain levels with real concern, and celebrated small improvements with authentic enthusiasm. When I finally managed to walk the length of the hospital corridor without assistance, Sarah's smile was so genuine and proud that I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in months. It was the kind of personal attention and care that I'd forgotten was possible. The contrast with Rachel became more apparent each day. Where my wife had offered support that felt dutiful and obligatory, Sarah's encouragement felt personal and sincere. I asked about my work, my interests, my goals for recovery, in ways that suggested she actually cared about the answers. I mentioned that I was an accountant. She didn't glaze over with boredom the way Rachel often had, but instead asked thoughtful questions about what I enjoyed about the profession. Numbers tell stories, Sarah observed during one of our sessions. Every financial statement represents someone's dreams, struggles, achievements. It must be satisfying to help people understand their financial narratives, her comment revealed. An intelligence and curiosity that made me realize how long it had been since someone had engaged with my work as anything more than a necessary evil that paid the bills. As my physical strength slowly returned, I found myself looking forward to therapy sessions for reasons that went beyond medical necessity. Sarah's presence had become a bright spot in days that were otherwise dominated by pain, loneliness, and the ongoing devastation of Rachel's abandonment. She treated me like a complete person rather than just a patient, someone worthy of attention and care, rather than someone to be managed or endured. The nursing staff began commenting on my improved mood and engagement with the recovery process. "You seem more motivated lately," Dr. Vasquez observed during one of her check-ins. "Whatever's inspiring that change, keep it up." Mental attitude is crucial for successful rehabilitation. I didn't mention that my inspiration had blonde hair and a laugh that could brighten the dreariest hospital room, but I suspected my medical team was beginning to notice my growing attachment to physical therapy sessions. Sarah never asked directly about Rachel's absence, but her careful attention to my emotional state suggested she understood I was dealing with more than surgical recovery. She would sometimes sit with me after therapy sessions, talking about anything except medical matters. She told me about her love for hiking in the mountains outside Chicago, her volunteer work with disabled veterans, her passion for helping people reclaim mobility and independence after traumatic injuries. "I became a physical therapist because I believe everyone deserves to feel strong and capable," Sarah explained one afternoon when I asked about her career choice. "Too many people accept limitations that don't have to be permanent. My job is to help them discover what's possible when they refuse to give up on themselves." Her words felt like a direct challenge to the way I'd been approaching not just physical recovery, but my entire life. Through Sarah's eyes, I began to see my situation differently. Instead of a man abandoned by his wife during his greatest vulnerability, I started to see myself as someone who had survived betrayal and was building strength. Instead of focusing on what Rachel had taken from me, I began to consider what I might be gaining through this experience. Sarah's unwavering belief in my potential for recovery made me start believing in it too. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic, but it was steady and genuine. Each successful therapy session built confidence that extended beyond physical capabilities. When I finally graduated from using a walker to walking independently, Sarah's pride in my achievement felt more meaningful than any celebration Rachel had ever offered. Her investment in my progress was personal in a way that my wife's support had never been. Meanwhile, divorce papers arrived via certified mail, handled by lawyers who reduced 12 years of marriage to property division and custody arrangements for pets we didn't have. Rachel's attorney was efficient and thorough, clearly eager to finalize the dissolution as quickly as possible. There were no requests for reconciliation discussions, no acknowledgement of the timing of her departure, no recognition that she was divorcing a man still recovering from major surgery. I signed the papers during a particularly good day, when therapy with Sarah had left me feeling strong and optimistic about the future. The legal end of my marriage felt anticlimactic compared to the emotional devastation I'd already processed. Rachel had left so completely and decisively that the divorce felt like a formality rather than a loss. She had already been gone from our relationship long before she physically disappeared from the hospital. Sarah never commented on the divorce papers when she saw them on my bedside table, but she did suggest that we add some new goals to my rehabilitation plan. "I think you're ready for more challenging exercises," she said, with that characteristic smile. "Time to start preparing for the life you want to build when you leave here." Her words carried implications that went far beyond physical therapy, suggesting that recovery was about more than returning to my previous condition. As I grew stronger physically, I also began to feel emotionally lighter. The constant weight of trying to understand Rachel's betrayal was gradually being replaced by curiosity about what came next. Sarah's presence had shown me that there were people in the world who could offer genuine care without agenda. Really could invest in someone's well-being without expecting anything in return. Her example was slowly teaching me to hope again. Revelation that someone could be interested in my thoughts, engaged with my recovery, and genuinely pleased by my company was transformative. After months of feeling like a burden to Rachel, Sarah's obvious enjoyment of our time together was healing wounds I hadn't even realized were there. She made me feel valuable again, worthy of attention and care, capable of inspiring genuine affection in another person. By the time I was ready for discharge from the hospital, my relationship with Sarah had evolved into something that felt precious and full of potential. We'd never crossed professional boundaries or discussed personal feelings directly, but the connection between us was undeniable. She'd become more than my physical therapist. She'd become my reminder that there were people in the world capable of the kind of authentic care I'd thought I'd lost forever. 3 weeks into my recovery, just as I was beginning to feel steady on my feet and optimistic about the future, Rachel returned to Chicago. I learned about her presence not from any direct communication, but from Lisa, who had spotted her at a downtown coffee shop near the hospital district. According to my sister, Rachel looked tanned and relaxed completely, transformed from the stressed, overworked woman who had fled during my surgery. She was laughing, Lisa reported with barely concealed disgust. Actually laughing, David. Like she didn't have a care in the world. Like she hadn't just abandoned her husband during major surgery.
Nice.
The image of Rachel enjoying herself while I'd been fighting through the most difficult period of my life was infuriating, but also clarifying. It confirmed that her departure had been liberating rather than agonizing, a choice that had freed her rather than tortured her. The confrontation came 2 days later. On a Thursday afternoon when I was finishing a particularly successful physical therapy session with Sarah, we'd been working on stair climbing, and I'd managed to complete the full sequence without assistance for the first time. Sarah was documenting my progress, her face bright with pride at my achievement, when Rachel appeared in the doorway of the therapy room. She looked exactly as Lisa had described, tanned, rested, and radiating the kind of contentment that comes from finally getting what you want. Her hair was lighter, styled differently, and she wore clothes I didn't recognize. Everything about her appearance suggested a complete reinvention, as if the woman who had been married to me for 12 years had been just a costume she'd finally removed. "Hello, David," Rachel said, her voice carrying the same clinical politeness she'd used with difficult patients at the hospital. "I heard you were making good progress with your recovery." She glanced at Sarah with curiosity but no jealousy, as if my physical therapist was just another medical professional rather than someone who had become central to my healing process. Sarah immediately sensed the tension in the room and excused herself professionally, but not before giving me a look that conveyed both support and concern. "I'll be at the nurse's station if you need anything," she said quietly, her words carrying implications that went beyond medical assistance. Her presence had become my anchor over the past few weeks, and losing it even temporarily felt destabilizing. "She seems nice," Rachel observed, once Sarah had left, settling into the visitor chair with the same casual confidence she'd always brought to hospital environments. "Physical therapy must be going well if you're already working on stairs." Her tone was pleasant, conversational, as if we were catching up after a brief separation, rather than confronting the wreckage of our marriage. "Why are you here, Rachel?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. 3 weeks ago, seeing her would have sent me into emotional chaos. Now, fortified by Sarah's consistent care and my own growing strength, I felt capable of handling whatever she had come to say. As the woman sitting in front of me felt like a stranger wearing my wife's face. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," she replied, crossing her legs and adjusting her purse with nervous energy that contradicted her composed facade. "I know the timing of my departure wasn't ideal, but I thought it might be easier for you to focus on recovery without the distraction of our relationship problems." Her words were carefully chosen, clinical, designed to reframe abandonment as consideration. The audacity of her explanation was breathtaking. "Not ideal timing," I repeated, feeling anger rise in my chest for the first time since reading her. Note: You left while I was unconscious on an operating table, Rachel. You abandoned me when I was most vulnerable and needed you most. That's not poor timing. That's calculated cruelty." Rachel's composure flickered for just a moment, revealing something that might have been guilt or discomfort. But she quickly recovered, straightening in her chair and adopting the professional tone she used when dealing with difficult administrative situations. "I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be, but staying would have been dishonest. To both of us. Our marriage had been over for months. We were just going through the motions. Whose decision was that?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she'd arrived at such a definitive conclusion about our relationship, because I don't remember having that conversation. I remember having a wife who encouraged me to have surgery, who promised to be there. When I woke up, who made me believe I had support during the most frightening experience of my life? She looked away, focusing on the hospital corridor visible through the therapy room window. "We deserved honesty, David. We both did. Staying and pretending everything was fine would have been cruel to both of us." Her logic was twisted, but clearly rehearsed, as if she'd spent weeks in Denver perfecting her justification for the timing of her departure. "What you deserved was a wife who honored her commitments," I said, feeling stronger and more articulate than I had in months. "What I deserved was a partner who could handle adversity without running away. What we both deserved was honesty before the crisis, not abandonment during it." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing that her carefully constructed narrative wasn't having the intended effect. "Marcus and I didn't plan for this to happen," she said, finally acknowledging what everyone already knew. "But when you're with someone who truly understands your professional passion, who shares your vision for the future, it becomes impossible to ignore what's missing in your current relationship." The mention of Marcus felt like a slap, but also like confirmation of something I'd suspected but been afraid to voice. "How long?" I asked simply, not needing to elaborate on what I meant. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of betrayal that went far beyond her. "Departure from the hospital. It's complicated," Rachel began, but I cut her off with a gesture that surprised both of us with its authority. "How long, Rachel? How long were you planning your escape while I was worrying about surgery? How long were you in love with Marcus while I was believing in our marriage?" My voice was calm but firm, strengthened by weeks of Sarah's encouragement, and my own growing sense of self-worth. She stared at her hands for a long moment before answering. 6 months, she said quietly. Maybe longer. It started as professional collaboration, but it became something more. Marcus makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He challenges me intellectually, supports my career ambitions, understands the demands of healthcare administration. 6 months, half a year of deception while I'd been struggling with chronic pain and preparing for surgery. It's half a year of sharing a bed with someone who is emotionally involved with another man. Half a year of believing in a marriage that had already ended in her mind. The timeline made her betrayal even more calculated and cruel. "And you thought the best time to tell me this was through a note while I was recovering from spinal surgery?" I asked, genuinely trying to understand the logic that had led to such a heartless decision. "You couldn't find the courage to have this conversation before I went under anesthesia." Rachel's professional composure finally cracked, revealing genuine distress underneath her calculated calm. I tried to find the right time, but there never seemed to be one. "You were so anxious about the surgery, so dependent on my support. I didn't want to add emotional stress when you were already dealing with physical challenges. So you decided to add maximum emotional stress during my most vulnerable moment instead?" I asked, amazed by the self-serving nature of her reasoning. "You chose to make my recovery infinitely more difficult by ensuring I faced it completely alone?" Before Rachel could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her timing perfect and probably intentional. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask her protective instincts. "But David's next appointment is ready, and we need to keep him on schedule for optimal recovery." Rachel looked between Sarah and me with dawning recognition, perhaps finally understanding that my recovery had involved more than just physical healing. There was something in Sarah's posture, in the way she positioned herself slightly between Rachel and me, that suggested a relationship that went beyond standard patient care. "Of course," Rachel said, standing and gathering her purse with renewed efficiency. "I should let you get back to your therapy." She paused at the door, turning back with what might have been genuine regret. I'm glad you're healing well, David. I truly am. You deserve to be happy and healthy. Yes, I said, looking directly at Sarah as she approached with my mobility aids. I do deserve that. And for the first time in months, I'm starting to believe it's possible. The words were meant for Rachel, but they were also meant for Sarah and for myself. They were a declaration of independence from the woman who had abandoned me and a recognition of the woman who had helped me heal. Rachel left without further comment, her departure as decisive as it had been from the hospital weeks earlier. But this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah was there, steady and warm and genuinely invested in my well-being. The contrast between the two women was so stark it was almost educational. A masterclass in the difference between obligation and authentic care. Are you okay? Sarah asked gently, her hand briefly touching my arm in a gesture that was both professional and personal. That looked intense. Her concern was genuine, unmarked by agenda or judgment, focused entirely on my emotional state rather than her own curiosity about the conversation she'd interrupted. I'm better than okay, I realized with surprise. I'm actually relieved. Seeing her again made me understand how much better my life has become without her in it. The truth of that statement was liberating, a recognition that Rachel's abandonment had been painful but ultimately beneficial. 6 months later, I was standing in Sarah's apartment kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner while she finished her notes from the day's patient sessions. The domestic scene felt surreal compared to where my life had been a year earlier, but also perfectly natural, as if this was where I'd always been meant to end up. The titanium rods in my spine had healed completely, leaving me stronger and more mobile than I'd been in years. Importantly, the emotional wounds Rachel had inflicted were finally beginning to heal as well. Sarah and I had navigated the transition from therapist and patient to friends to something deeper with careful consideration for professional boundaries and emotional readiness. She'd insisted on a waiting period after my discharge from physical therapy, wanting to ensure that any feelings between us were genuine rather than born from the intensity of medical recovery. Her thoughtfulness in handling our relationship was just another example of the authentic care she brought to everything in her life. How was your day at Morrison? Sarah asked, looking up from her paperwork with the same genuine interest she'd shown from our first therapy session. She asked about my work not out of obligation, but because she truly cared about my professional satisfaction and daily experience. The contrast with Rachel's dutiful inquiries about my job was stark and refreshing. Actually incredible, I said, setting down the knife and turning to face her fully. James and I just landed the biggest client in the firm's history, a healthcare consortium that wants us to handle financial planning for their expansion into rural markets. The irony that my new professional success involved healthcare administration wasn't lost on either of us, but it felt like reclamation rather than reminder. Sarah's face lit up with pride and excitement, her response so genuine and enthusiastic that it took my breath away. This was what it felt like to be with someone who was truly invested in your happiness, who celebrated your successes as if they were her own. David, that's amazing. Tell me everything. How did the presentation go? What convinced them to choose Morrison? As I described the client meeting and the project details, Sarah listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions, and offering insights from her own experience in healthcare. Her intelligence and curiosity made every conversation engaging, challenging me to think more deeply about my work and its broader implications. She made me feel interesting and capable, in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The apartment we were in represented another major change in my life. After the divorce was finalized, I'd sold the house in Naperville, unable to stomach living in a space filled with memories of Rachel's deception. Sarah's place in Oak Park was smaller but infinitely warmer, filled with books about physical therapy, techniques, hiking gear from weekend adventures, and photographs of patients who had sent thank you notes celebrating their recovery milestones. I got a letter today from Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said, showing me a handwritten note from an elderly woman who had relearned to walk after a hip replacement. She's planning to take her first international trip in 5 years. She wanted to thank the therapy team for giving her the confidence to travel again. Sarah's work involved helping people reclaim their lives after trauma, and the gratitude she received was a constant reminder of the meaningful impact she had on others. Living with Sarah had taught me what it meant to be with someone whose compassion was genuine rather than performed. She brought the same authentic care to our relationship that she brought to her patients, creating an environment where healing and growth felt natural and supported. Her love wasn't conditional on my mood or productivity. It was steady and reliable in ways that made me feel secure for the first time in years. We'd talked extensively about Rachel and the end of my marriage, processing the betrayal and abandonment. With the same methodical approach Sarah brought to physical rehabilitation, she'd helped me understand that healing from emotional trauma, it's like healing from surgery, required patience, consistency, and belief in the possibility of full recovery. Under her guidance, I'd learned to see Rachel's departure not as evidence of my inadequacy, but as proof of her limitations. "I never thanked you properly," I said, moving to sit beside her at the kitchen table where she was finishing her patient notes. "Not just for the physical therapy, but for showing me what it feels like to be cared for by someone who actually wants to be present in my life." Sarah looked up from her paperwork, her expression soft with affection and understanding. "Don't need to thank me for caring about you, David. That's not something you earn or deserve to lose. It's just what happens when someone sees who you really are and likes what they find." Her words carried the weight of someone who understood that love should enhance rather than diminish, support rather than burden. The contrast with my marriage to Rachel was so complete, it sometimes felt like comparing to different universes. Where Rachel had made me feel like my needs were inconvenient, Sarah made me feel like caring for me was a privilege. Where Rachel had treated our relationship like a project to be managed, Sarah approached it like an adventure to be enjoyed. Where Rachel had seen my recovery as an obligation she wanted to escape, Sarah had seen it as an opportunity to help someone reclaim their strength. "I love you," I said, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. We'd been building toward this declaration for months, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a threshold into something permanent and transformative. "I love your intelligence, your compassion, your unwavering belief in people's potential. For healing, I love the way you make me want to be stronger and better, not because I'm inadequate, but because growth is always possible." Sarah's smile was radiant, unguarded in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. "I love you too," she said, reaching for my hand with the same gentle confidence she'd shown during those first difficult therapy sessions. "I love your resilience, your kindness, your ability to find hope, even after someone tried to take it away from you. I love that you chose to heal rather than become bitter." That evening, as we walked along the lakefront near her apartment, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been married to a woman who saw me as an obligation, living with chronic pain that limited my mobility and optimism. Now I was walking pain-free beside someone who saw me as a gift, planning a future that felt full of possibility rather than compromise. The surgery that had been intended to fix my spine had ended up transforming my entire life. Rachel's abandonment, devastating as it had been, had cleared the way for a relationship based on authentic care rather than duty. The titanium rods in my back were a permanent reminder of vulnerability overcome. But Sarah's presence in my life was proof that sometimes the most painful experiences lead to the most beautiful outcomes. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noticing my contemplative mood as we paused to watch the sunset over Lake Michigan. The question was typical of her attentiveness, her genuine interest in my inner experience, rather than just my external circumstances. "I'm thinking about second chances," I said, pulling her closer as the evening air grew cooler. "About how sometimes what feels like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be the beginning of the best thing that ever did." The rehabilitation center in Oak Park became my temporary sanctuary for the next month, crucial stepping stone between the high-intensity care I'd received at Northwestern Memorial and the independent life I was working hard to reclaim. The facility was designed for people like Mythos, recovering from major surgeries, offering a space where daily challenges tested both body and spirit. What I hadn't anticipated was how much this experience would reshape my understanding of genuine care. Sarah was assigned as my lead physical therapist throughout my stay. Her ongoing involvement proved invaluable, especially after the constantly rotating hospital staff. With Sarah, there was consistency. She followed my recovery closely, fine-tuning our sessions based not just on my physical progress, but also my emotional ups and downs. Her presence became a stabilizing force during a period of intense personal upheaval. Each morning began at 7, with basic assessments, evaluating my mobility, sleep quality, and whether the previous day's exercises had caused setbacks. Sarah would arrive an hour later, always on time, coffee in hand for both of us, along with a detailed plan. For the day, her approach was always prepared, yet flexible, leaving room to pivot depending on how I was feeling, physically or mentally. "Pain is just data," she said one morning when I winced through a movement that felt impossible. It tells us where to focus, but it doesn't decide what we're capable of. We'll expand your limits gently, respecting the discomfort without letting it rule you. Her philosophy blended physical therapy with emotional wisdom, helping me reframe my relationship to pain from something to fear to something to learn from. The early exercises were deceptively simple: assisted walks, light stretches, muscle activation, work small steps that laid the groundwork for long-term strength. Sarah's talent wasn't just her clinical skill, but her intuitive ability to push me slightly beyond comfort without ever making me feel unsafe. She had an almost instinctive sense of when to motivate, when to pull back, when to celebrate a milestone, and when to set a new target. What truly set her apart from every other clinician I'd encountered was her sincere interest in who I was beyond my injury. She asked about my work not out of politeness, but because she was genuinely curious about what drove me. When I spoke about the satisfaction I got from helping small businesses navigate financial challenges, she listened in a way that made me feel heard and respected. "There's something elegant in what you do," she once said, after I described helping a family-run restaurant straighten out years of tangled finances. "You're bringing clarity to chaos. It's a kind of healing, just like we do, only your medium is numbers, and mine is the human body." Her ability to find deep connections between unrelated fields reflected a sharp intellect that extended far beyond her medical training. The center's schedule was structured but accommodating, designed to encourage recovery while allowing for personal rhythms. Mornings were dedicated to core strength and mobility. Afternoons tackled more advanced movements, stamina building, and coordination. Evenings included sessions focused on long-term care strategies. Sarah guided me through each phase, always adapting our plan based on how I was responding. During the evening education sessions, she'd show me the post-op x-rays of the titanium rods now reinforcing my spine. "These give you the stability," she said one night, pointing to the glowing hardware, "but it's the muscles around them that keep you mobile. What we're building now is what will protect you going forward, not just from injury, but from going backward." Her outlook was practical, but deeply optimistic. She'd seen enough recoveries to know what was truly possible, and she celebrated each achievement as if it were her own. My first independent lap across the therapy room, the first time I climbed a staircase without stopping. Her pride in my progress felt personal, not just professional, as if our work together symbolized something larger than recovery. Evenings at the center were quiet, giving space for reflection. I'd often find myself in the communal lounge, reading or working on documents that James brought from the office. Around me were others' patients at different stages of healing, each navigating their own private journey. There was a quiet camaraderie in our shared struggle to rebuild what had been broken. Sometimes Sarah stayed after hours. She'd check in on patients who were anxious, in pain, or simply needed someone to talk to. Her care extended beyond the scheduled sessions. It was in her character. I began to notice that she approached each person with the same genuine care she showed me, taking time to address concerns and provide encouragement even when it wasn't technically part of her scheduled duties. Her dedication went far beyond professional requirements, revealing a character that was generous and deeply compassionate. One evening, when I was feeling particularly discouraged by the slow pace of improvement, Sarah found me sitting alone in the rehabilitation center's small library, staring at divorce papers that had arrived that afternoon. Rachel's attorney had expedited the process, clearly eager to finalize the dissolution as quickly as possible. The legal language reduced 12 years of marriage to property distributions and debt allocations, making our relationship feel like a failed business venture rather than a human connection. "Rough day?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from me without being invited, her presence immediately making the room feel less lonely. She didn't ask about the papers directly, but her eyes showed understanding and concern for whatever was causing my obvious distress. Her ability to offer support without demanding explanations was one of the qualities I'd come to value most about her approach to both therapy and friendship. "I'm signing away 12 years of my life," I said, gesturing toward the documents. Spread across the small table, it feels surreal to reduce everything we shared to legal language and financial arrangements. Part of me keeps expecting to feel more devastated than I actually do. The admission surprised me with its honesty, revealing emotions I hadn't fully processed until speaking them aloud. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, her expression reflecting understanding rather than judgment. "Sometimes the end of something painful feels like relief rather than loss," she said gently. "That doesn't make you callous or ungrateful for what was good about your marriage. It might just mean you're ready for something better." Her words carried wisdom that went beyond her years, suggesting experience with loss and recovery that extended beyond professional training. "Have you ever been married?" I asked, realizing how little I knew about Sarah's personal life despite the hours we'd spent together. Our conversations had focused primarily on my recovery and rehabilitation, with only occasional glimpses into her background and experiences. Her consistent focus on my well-being had made me forget that she had her own story, her own challenges and triumphs. "Almost," Sarah replied with a wry smile that suggested both regret and relief. "I was engaged to someone during graduate school, a fellow physical therapy student who seemed perfect on paper. We had the same career goals, similar backgrounds, shared professional interests. But I gradually realized that having things in common isn't the same as truly connecting. We understood each other's work, but we didn't really see each other as complete people." Her story resonated with my own experience in ways that felt both comforting and illuminating. "What changed your mind about marrying him?" I asked, genuinely curious about the decision-making process that had led her away from what sounded like a suitable partnership. Her willingness to share personal information felt like a gift, an indication that our relationship was evolving beyond the boundaries of patient and therapist. "I realized I was settling for compatibility instead of holding out for connection," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had made a difficult decision and never regretted it. "He was a good person, and we would have had a perfectly functional marriage, but I wanted more than functional. Wanted to be with someone who made me feel excited about sharing my thoughts and experiences, someone whose presence enhanced rather than simply accommodated my life." Her words articulated something I'd been struggling to understand about my own marriage to Rachel. We'd been compatible on paper, sharing professional interests and practical goals, but we'd never achieved the kind of deep connection that made daily life feel enriched rather than managed. Rachel had been a suitable partner for the life I thought I wanted, but she'd never been someone who made me feel genuinely seen and valued for who I was beneath my roles and responsibilities. "Do you think it's possible to find that kind of connection?" I asked, surprised by the vulnerability in my own voice. "Or is it something people tell themselves to justify being picky about relationships?" The question revealed fears I'd been carrying for months, doubts about whether my expectations for partnership were realistic, or whether I was destined to settle for whatever functional arrangement I could maintain. Sarah's response was immediate and certain, delivered with the same confidence she brought to discussions about my physical recovery. "I know it's possible because I've seen it," she said firmly. "My parents have been married for 35 years and they still light up when they see each other. They're not just committed to their marriage. They're genuinely delighted by each other's company. It's what I'm holding out for, and I think you should too." Her certainty was both inspiring and terrifying, suggesting possibilities for connection that felt almost too hopeful to pursue. But Sarah's unwavering belief in positive outcomes had proven accurate throughout my physical rehabilitation. If she thought genuine partnership was possible, Perhaps it was worth considering that my marriage to Rachel had been the exception rather than the rule. The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship, shifting from purely professional interaction towards something more personal and mutual. Sarah began sharing more details about her life outside the rehabilitation center, her volunteer work with veterans, her love of hiking in the mountains surrounding Chicago, her close relationship with her family in Wisconsin. In return, I found myself opening up about aspects of my life that had nothing to do with my injury or recovery. We discovered shared interests that surprised both of us. Sarah's undergraduate degree was in mathematics, making her one of the few people I'd met who genuinely understood and appreciated the elegance of financial analysis. She could follow my explanations of complex accounting principles and even offered insights that helped me think about my work in new ways. Her intellectual curiosity made every conversation engaging, challenging me to articulate my thoughts more clearly and consider alternative perspectives. The physical therapy sessions became the highlight of each day, not just because of the progress we were making, but because of the easy companionship that had developed between us. Sarah's encouragement felt personal rather than professional, invested in my success for reasons that went beyond her job requirements. When I finally managed to complete a full workout routine without assistance, her pride in my achievement was so genuine and enthusiastic that it took my breath away. "You're not just getting stronger," Sarah observed during one of our final sessions at the rehabilitation center. "You're becoming more confident, more willing to take risks, and push your boundaries. That's going to serve you well in every area of your life, not just physical recovery." Her words felt prophetic, suggesting transformations that extended far beyond my surgical healing. As my discharge date approached, I found myself reluctant to leave the structured environment of the rehabilitation center. Not because I wasn't ready for independence, but because I wasn't ready to lose the daily presence of someone who had become so important to my healing process. Sarah had been more than my physical therapist. She'd been my guide back to believing in my own worth and potential. The realization that I was falling in love with Sarah came gradually, then all at once. Like sunrise, slowly illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness. She represented everything I hadn't known I was missing in my marriage to Rachel. Genuine interest in my thoughts and experiences. Authentic investment in my well-being. The kind of intellectual and emotional connection that made every interaction feel meaningful rather than obligatory. But recognizing my feelings also created new complications. Sarah was my healthcare provider, bound by professional ethics that prohibited romantic relationships with patients. Even after my discharge, there would be questions about appropriate boundaries and timing that would need careful consideration. The last thing I wanted was to compromise her professional reputation or put her in an uncomfortable position because of feelings she might not reciprocate. On my final day at the rehabilitation center, Sarah presented me with a comprehensive home exercise program designed to maintain and continue building on the progress we'd made together. Her instructions were detailed and thorough, covering everything from daily stretching routines to warning signs that might indicate the need for additional medical attention. But beneath the professional guidance, I sensed personal concern about my continued well-being. "Remember that recovery isn't a destination," Sarah said, as we completed our final official therapy session. "It's an ongoing process that requires consistent attention and self-advocacy. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or concerns about maintaining your progress." Her words were professionally appropriate, but her eyes conveyed something more personal. An investment in my future that went beyond her official responsibilities. As I packed my belongings and prepared to return to independent living, I carried with me more than just improved mobility and pain management. Sarah had helped me rediscover confidence in my own resilience, optimism about future possibilities, and belief that I deserved genuine care and attention from the people in my life. Her example had shown me what authentic compassion looked like, creating a template for the kind of relationships I wanted to pursue going forward. The transformation that had begun with surgical recovery was now complete in ways that went far beyond physical healing. I was leaving the rehabilitation center not just with a repaired spine, but with a repaired sense of self-worth and possibility. Sarah had been the catalyst for changes that would influence every aspect of my future. helping me understand that sometimes the most devastating experiences create opportunities for the most profound growth. Part 4. The confrontation. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 weeks after my discharge from the rehabilitation center. Just as I was beginning to feel fully settled into my new life as a divorced man living alone in a downtown Chicago apartment, the voice on the other end was familiar but unwelcome. Rachel's carefully modulated tone carrying the same professional courtesy she'd always used when discussing difficult administrative matters at the hospital. "David, I hope I'm not interrupting your day," she began, as if we were colleagues coordinating a meeting rather than estranged spouses who hadn't spoken since divorce papers were signed. "I'm going to be in Chicago next week for some business with the hospital, and I was hoping we could talk. There are some things I'd like to explain, some closure I think we both need." The request caught me completely off guard. For months, I'd been processing the end of our marriage through therapy sessions, conversations with friends, and long walks through the city as I rebuilt my physical and emotional strength. Rachel had become a figure from my past, someone whose actions had shaped my present but who no longer held power over my future. Her sudden desire for conversation felt intrusive and unwelcome. "I'm not sure what there is to discuss," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "You made your position clear when you left during my surgery. The divorce is finalized. Our property has been divided, and we've both moved on with our lives. What could possibly require further explanation?" My response was honest but not unkind, reflecting the emotional distance I'd achieved through months of healing and growth. Rachel paused, perhaps surprised by my lack of enthusiasm. "For reconciliation or closure? I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be," she said, adopting the tone she'd used when dealing with upset patients' families. "But I think if you understood the full situation, the pressures I was facing, and the impossible choices I had to make, you might have more compassion for the decision I made." The implication that I simply didn't grasp her point of view was both offensive and illuminating. It showed me that Rachel still filtered our relationship through her own needs and rationalizations. "I understand just fine," I replied, evenly. "You fell in love with someone else and chose to end our marriage when I was least able to respond or fight back. It's not complex, it's just cruel." But Rachel wasn't giving up easily. She used the same firm persuasion that had made her effective in hospital leadership. "Please, David, just one conversation. I flew back from Denver just to talk this through. Give me 30 minutes to explain. And if you still want nothing to do with me afterward, I'll respect that." There was weight in her request, not just the words, but the fact she'd traveled specifically for this moment. Against my instincts, I agreed to meet. We chose a neutral coffee shop downtown, nowhere near the hospital where she'd once worked, or the neighborhood we used to call home. It was important to talk in a place free from old memories, where the setting itself didn't stir emotions I wasn't ready to face. I wasn't looking for closure or reconciliation. I just wanted to hear how she'd attempt to justify what she'd done. The cafe was lively, filled with students, business people, and tourists. The background noise offered a layer of emotional insulation. I got there early, picking a seat by the window where I could see the street and make a swift exit if things took a turn. Rachel arrived right on time, looking impeccably put together, poised and confident, like she was prepping for a key meeting rather than a reckoning with her past. She looked slightly different, more polished, more self-assured. Her new life in Denver had clearly shaped her. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat across from me with that familiar, practiced grace. "I know this isn't easy, but I wanted to offer more than the note I left behind." Her voice was steady, earnest but controlled. She had rehearsed this, that much was clear. "Go ahead," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't going to play into the illusion that we were two old friends having a heart-to-heart. This wasn't a reunion, it was fallout management. Rachel sipped her coffee, then began what was clearly a scripted explanation. "The truth is, our marriage had been unraveling for a long time," she said with the conviction of someone who'd told herself this story until she believed it. "We were living more like roommates, no real connection, no shared goals." Her version wasn't entirely false, but it was a selective truth, one that ignored the real context and her own accountability. "That's a convenient rewrite," I replied evenly. Because I remember being a husband struggling with chronic pain, still showing up to support a wife climbing the career ladder while she secretly built an emotional life with someone else. For the first time, her confident expression faltered. The cracks in her polished delivery began to show. "You're right, I didn't handle it well," she admitted. "I should have been honest sooner, but David, you have to see it from my side. Marcus brought something into my life that had been missing: mental stimulation, emotional connection." Bringing up Marcus felt calculated, as if she was testing whether I'd respond with jealousy or rage, but I refused to give her that. Satisfaction. "I'm glad you found what you were missing," I said, sincerely, "but I still don't understand why you chose to leave me while I was unconscious on an operating table. If honesty and connection mattered so much to you, why the most brutal timing imaginable?" Rachel shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable now. Her well-rehearsed story wasn't landing the way she'd hoped. "I didn't plan it that way," she said defensively. "But I didn't know how else to handle it. You were so dependent on me during your recovery. I felt like if I didn't act then, I'd lose the chance to be honest and move forward." "So your solution was to vanish while I was at my most vulnerable?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "You couldn't wait until I was conscious, stable, and ready to have that conversation. Instead, you left a note while I was still groggy. From anesthesia?" That question seemed to reach past her defenses. Her composure broke further, and this time her response was quieter, more human. "I panicked," she said softly. "Marcus was offered a job in Denver, and the decision had to be made quickly. I told myself a clean break would be better for both of us. I thought it would hurt less than dragging it out." Her explanation, while honest, only confirmed what I'd already suspected: her departure wasn't about protecting me or doing what was best for both of us. It was about her seizing an opportunity, regardless of the wreckage it left behind. That wasn't relationship management, that was emotional abuse. My voice was steady but firm, a reflection of the months I'd spent processing and coming to terms with the truth of what had happened between us. Rachel's professional veneer finally cracked, giving way to visible distress and perhaps real remorse beneath all the carefully composed justifications. "You're right," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I was a coward. I didn't want to face the pain or the conflict. So I chose the worst possible way to end things. I told myself it would be easier for both of us if I disappeared, but the truth is it was just easier for me." It was the most genuine thing she'd said all afternoon, but it came far too late to change anything of substance. "Thank you for being honest," I replied sincerely. "But honesty now doesn't erase what happened. You left me when I needed you the most. No explanation can take away the hurt you caused." Just then, Sarah returned from the counter, where she'd been ordering coffee, and approached our table. Her arrival was a subtle but powerful reminder of the life I was rebuilding without Rachel in it. "I should go," Rachel said, standing and gathering her things with her usual composed efficiency. "I'm glad we talked. I'm genuinely happy for you for finding someone who deserves your trust." As she prepared to leave, Sarah reached our table, her natural warmth softening even the tension of this difficult moment. "It's nice to meet you," she said to Rachel with sincere politeness. "I hope your time in Chicago goes well." Her poise and kindness, even under pressure, were just more proof of what had drawn me to her in the first place. "I care of him," Rachel said. Turning to Sarah, her voice carried a surprising weight, not just casual parting words, but something more meaningful. "He's a good man. He deserves happiness." Though the comment was addressed to Sarah, it was clearly meant for me, to perhaps the closest Rachel could come to an apology. As she walked away, Sarah slid into the seat across from me, her presence immediately grounding and calming the atmosphere. "Are you okay?" she asked, her concern completely focused on me, not out of curiosity about the exchange, but out of genuine care. "I'm better than okay," I realized as I said it. Seeing her again made it clear I've moved on. She's just someone I used to live with, that's all. It was a freeing realization. Rachel no longer had the power to hurt me. That part of my life was over. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with pride and relief. "She seemed like she's working through some regrets," she said. "Ever compassionated toward someone who had caused so much damage? But that's her journey, not yours." "Exactly," I said, reaching for her hand across the table. I'm done looking backward. I want to focus on what's ahead. And from where I'm sitting, the future looks incredible. My words were more than a reflection. They were a commitment to the life we were creating together. 8 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of the apartment Sarah and I now shared in Lincoln Park, making breakfast while she finished her morning run along the lake. The routine felt simple but extraordinary, a daily reminder of the kind of relationship I'd once stopped believing was possible. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over a space that felt more like home than any place I'd shared with Rachel. The comfort here wasn't just physical, it was emotional, built on mutual effort and genuine presence. Right on cue, I heard her key in the door as I was finishing up the scrambled eggs and fruit. She walked in, glowing from her run, her energy filling the room, her smile lighting up as she saw the meal waiting for her. You spoil me, she teased, kissing my cheek before heading to shower. Give me 5 minutes to rinse off, and then I want to hear all about your client meeting yesterday. Her interest wasn't performative, it was real. I never took that for granted anymore. The meeting she was referring to had been a big one. Morrison and Associates, a healthcare consortium we'd been working with, had agreed to expand their partnership with our firm based on the success of our initial financial strategy. That my professional life had become increasingly linked to healthcare again wasn't lost on me, but it no longer felt like a painful reminder. It felt like reclaiming something. While Sarah showered, I reflected on how far I'd come, recovering from surgery had been easier than navigating the emotional aftermath of Rachel's betrayal, that healing had been reshaped by Sarah's presence. She had shown me that love wasn't meant to be rare or conditional, that being seen, heard, and valued wasn't too much to ask. Sometimes the worst losses make room for the most beautiful discoveries. Tell me everything, she said when she returned, settling into her chair, fully engaged, just as she always was. She wore one of my old t-shirts and a pair of running shorts, perfectly at ease in the life we were creating together. Ability to make even the most ordinary mornings feel meaningful was one of the many reasons I knew this time I'd found the real thing. Morrison landed the contract for their rural expansion project, I announced, unable to contain my excitement about the professional opportunity that would significantly grow our firm. They want us to handle financial planning for 12 new clinics across 3 states. It's the biggest project in the company's history. And James thinks it could position us to become the premier healthcare financial consultancy in the Midwest. Sarah's face lit up with genuine pride and excitement, her response so enthusiastic and supportive that it took my breath away. This was what it felt like to be with someone who celebrated your successes as if they were her own, who understood that your professional growth enhanced rather than threatened your relationship. Her joy in my achievement was pure and unselfish, focused entirely on what this opportunity meant for my satisfaction and future. David, that's incredible, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Tell me about the project scope. What kind of financial challenges do rural healthcare facilities face that urban ones don't? Her questions were thoughtful and engaged, demonstrating both interest in my work and knowledge from her own healthcare experience. As I described the complexities of rural healthcare economics and the unique challenges of serving populations with limited insurance coverage and transportation access, Sarah listened with complete attention. She asked clarifying questions that helped me think more deeply about the project and offered insights from her own experience working with patients from underserved communities. Her intelligence and curiosity made every conversation stimulating and collaborative. This could be really meaningful work, Sarah observed after I'd outlined the project's potential impact. Rural communities desperately need healthcare access. And if your financial planning helps make these clinics sustainable, you'll be directly improving people's lives. Her ability to see the larger purpose in my professional activities was inspiring, helping me recognize the social value in work I'd previously viewed as purely technical. The breakfast conversation evolved naturally into planning for the weekend. A hiking trip to Starved Rock State Park that would test my physical capabilities and celebrate how far my recovery had progressed. Sarah had been gradually introducing more challenging outdoor activities as my strength and endurance improved. always careful to respect my limitations while encouraging me to expand my boundaries. I packed extra water and snacks, Sarah said, already thinking ahead to ensure our adventure would be safe and enjoyable. The trail we're taking has some steep sections, but nothing you can't handle at this point. I'm excited to see how you feel tackling more challenging terrain. Her planning was thorough but never felt controlling, focused on maximizing our enjoyment rather than managing my capabilities. The care Sarah brought to planning our activities was characteristic of how she approached everything in our relationship. She paid attention to my energy levels, my interests, my goals, and my concerns, then worked to create experiences that would be fulfilling for both of us. Her attentiveness felt natural rather than burdensome, the expression of someone who genuinely enjoyed figuring out how to make me happy. After breakfast, we walked to Sarah's clinic together. A morning ritual that had developed as our relationship deepened and our schedules allowed. The physical therapy center where she worked was only 6 blocks from our apartment, making it easy for me to walk her to work before heading to my own office downtown. These shared commutes had become precious time for connecting about our days ahead and continuing conversations from home. Mrs. Peterson is coming in for her final session today, Sarah mentioned as we strolled through Lincoln Park, referring to an elderly woman who had been recovering from hip replacement surgery. She's planning to take a cruise to Alaska next month, something she'd never thought she'd be able to do again. I love these success stories, watching people reclaim activities they thought they'd lost forever. Sarah's work involved helping people rebuild their lives after trauma, injury, or illness, and the gratitude she received from patients was a constant reminder of the meaningful impact she had on others. Her stories about patient recovery were inspiring and humbling, showcasing the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of skilled, compassionate care during vulnerable periods. "You gave me that same gift," I said, stopping to face her on the sidewalk outside her clinic. "Not just physical recovery, but the belief that I could build a better life than the one I'd lost. You helped me understand that Rachel's abandonment wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a much better chapter." My words were spontaneous but deeply felt, expressing gratitude that had been building for months. Sarah's response was immediate and emotional, her eyes bright with affection and understanding. "You did the hard work of healing, David. I just provided support and encouragement. Your strength and resilience were always there. You just needed reminding of what was possible." Her humility was characteristic, always deflecting credit while acknowledging the real effort that recovery required. The moment felt significant enough to warrant a deeper conversation about our future together, something we'd been approaching gradually as our relationship strengthened and our individual healing progressed. "I love you," I said, the words feeling both familiar and momentous. "I love the way you see the best in people, your dedication to helping others heal, and your ability to find joy in ordinary moments. I love the life we're building together." "I love you too," Sarah replied, her smile radiant and unguarded. "I love your intelligence, your kindness, your determination to grow from difficult experiences rather than become bitter. I love that you chose to trust again after someone broke that trust so completely." Her words carried weight beyond romantic declaration, acknowledging the courage it had taken for both of us to remain open to love after previous disappointments. Part 4. The confrontation, the unexpected phone call arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late September, disrupting what had become a comfortable routine of work, evening walks, and quiet dinners with Sarah. I was reviewing financial projections for the rural healthcare expansion when my office phone rang, displaying a Denver area code that immediately sent a chill through my chest. Rachel's voice on the other end was carefully modulated, professional yet somehow urgent, carrying the tone she'd always used when coordinating complex hospital situations. "David, I hope you have a few minutes to talk," she began without preamble. Her words rushed as if she'd been rehearsing this conversation but was nervous about actually having it. "I'm flying into Chicago tomorrow for a healthcare administration conference, and I was hoping we could meet. There are some things I need to discuss with you, some developments you should probably know about." Her request felt both presumptuous and ominous, suggesting complications I wasn't prepared to handle. The last thing I wanted was to revisit the wreckage of our marriage, especially when my life with Sarah had reached such a peaceful and fulfilling equilibrium. But something in Rachel's tone suggested this wasn't about reconciliation or closure, but about practical matters that might affect me whether I wanted them to or not. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee the following afternoon. Choosing a neutral location downtown that held no emotional significance for either of us, Sarah was understanding when I explained the situation that evening. Her response characteristically supportive, even though I could see concern in her eyes. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked gently, settling beside me on our couch with the kind of physical closeness that had become natural between us. "You don't owe Rachel anything at this point, especially if seeing her is going to disrupt your peace of mind." "I'm curious more than anything else," I admitted, appreciating Sarah's protective instincts while recognizing that I felt strong enough to handle whatever Rachel might want to discuss. 8 months ago, seeing her would have devastated me. Now, she feels like someone from a previous life, interesting but not threatening. I think I need to prove to myself that I've truly moved on. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, her understanding of human psychology extending beyond physical rehabilitation to emotional healing. "Just remember that you can leave at any point if the conversation becomes uncomfortable or manipulative," she reminded me. "You're in control of this situation, not her." Her words were both practical advice and emotional support, reinforcing my sense of agency in dealing with my past. The coffee shop Rachel had suggested was busy with the usual mix of business people and university students, providing enough background noise and activity to make our conversation feel less intimate and charged. One arrived a few minutes early and chose a table near the back, wanting to ensure privacy while maintaining easy access to an exit if the discussion became too intense or confrontational. Rachel appeared precisely on time, looking polished and successful in a way that suggested her new life in Denver had enhanced rather than diminished her professional standing. Her appearance was subtly different from how I remembered her. More confident and relaxed, as if removing herself from our marriage had eliminated a source of stress I hadn't realized she was experiencing. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, settling into the chair across from me with obvious nervousness despite her composed exterior. "I know this is awkward, and I appreciate you taking the time when you certainly don't owe me any favors." Acknowledgement of the situations. Difficulty felt genuine, though I remained wary of her motivations for requesting this meeting. "What did you want to discuss?" I asked directly, not interested in small talk or gradual approaches to whatever had prompted her return to Chicago. The months of healing had given me clarity about what I was and wasn't willing to invest in. Conversations about our failed relationship and social pleasantries felt like unnecessary energy expenditure. Rachel took a careful sip of her coffee before responding, clearly gathering her thoughts for what was obviously a prepared explanation. "Marcus and I are getting married next month," she announced, watching my face carefully for any reaction to this news. "I wanted you to hear it from me rather than through mutual friends or social media. Thought I owed you that courtesy after everything that happened between us." The information felt anticlimactic rather than devastating confirmation of something I'd assumed was inevitable rather than a surprise that required emotional processing. "Congratulations," I said sincerely, finding that I genuinely felt no jealousy or resentment about her happiness with someone else. "I hope you're both very happy together." My response seemed to surprise her, perhaps because she'd been expecting anger or bitterness, or something else, Rachel continued, her nervousness increasing as she approached what was obviously the more difficult part of her announcement. "Marcus has been offered a position heading the entire Western Regional Healthcare Network, which would make him one of the youngest executives in the company's history. It's an incredible opportunity that we can't pass up." I waited for her to continue, sensing that this professional advancement somehow involved me in ways I couldn't yet understand. Rachel's reluctance to get to the point suggested that whatever she needed to tell me was more complicated than simple career updates or relationship announcements. "The position requires extensive travel and relationship building with healthcare systems across multiple states," Rachel explained, her words becoming more rushed as she approached her actual request. "Part of that responsibility involves establishing partnerships with financial consulting firms that specialize in healthcare economics. Your firm's work with rural clinic expansion has gotten attention at the corporate level." The realization of where this conversation was heading hit me like a physical blow. not because it was painful, but because it was so absurdly ironic. "You're telling me that your new husband wants to hire my company?" I asked, barely able to believe the situation Rachel was describing. The woman who abandoned me during surgery now wants to create a professional relationship between her new life and mine. Rachel's composure finally cracked, revealing genuine discomfort with the position she was placing both of us in. "No. How this sounds, and I understand if you find it completely inappropriate," she said quickly. "But David, this could be an enormous opportunity for Morrison and Associates. Marcus genuinely admires the work your firm is doing, and this partnership could establish you as the premier healthcare financial consultancy in the region." "Does Marcus know about our history?" I asked, curious about how much Rachel had shared with her new partner about the circumstances of our divorce. "Does he understand that his wife abandoned her previous husband during major surgery to be with him?" The question was pointed but not cruel, designed to understand the full context of this unexpected professional opportunity. "He knows we're married and that our divorce was finalized around the time he and I began our relationship," Rachel replied carefully, her answer revealing how much of the truth she'd omitted from her explanation to Marcus. "I haven't shared all the specific details about the timing of our separation. I thought it would be better to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes." Her euphemistic description of abandonment as separation timing was both infuriating and revealing, showing that Rachel still couldn't fully acknowledge the cruelty of her actions. But before I could respond to her selective honesty, a familiar voice interrupted our conversation. "David?" Sarah's voice carried surprise and concern as she approached our table, clearly not having expected to encounter me during what she probably assumed was a routine coffee run. I thought that was you. How's everything going?" Her presence immediately shifted the energy of our conversation, bringing warmth and authenticity into a space that had felt tense and artificial. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Rachel," I said, standing to greet her properly and feeling my mood lift significantly just from her unexpected presence. "Rachel, this is Sarah Williams, my partner." The introduction felt both natural and significant, marking the first time I'd referred to Sarah as my partner rather than my girlfriend or the physical therapist who had helped with my recovery. Rachel's reaction to Sarah was immediate and complex, her expressions cycling through surprise, curiosity, and what might have been regret as she took in the obvious connection between us. "So you're Sarah," Rachel said, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with assessment. "David's mentioned how important you were to his recovery process." Sarah accepted the acknowledgement graciously, while clearly recognizing the undercurrents of tension in our meeting. "David was an exceptional patient," she replied diplomatically, her professional training helping her navigate an obviously delicate situation. "His commitment to healing was remarkable. It was my privilege to help him through that process." "I should let you to finish your conversation," Sarah continued tactfully, recognizing that she'd interrupted something significant. "David, I'll see you at home later. Take your time with whatever you need to discuss." Her words were supportive and understanding, but I could see the protective concern in her eyes as she prepared to leave us alone. "Shall I stay for a minute?" I said, reaching for Sarah's hand in a gesture that felt both natural and deliberately pointed. "Rachel was just telling me about a potential business opportunity that involves her new life in Denver. I'd value your perspective on the situation." My invitation wasn't just about including Sarah in the conversation. It was about demonstrating the kind of partnership I'd built with someone who actually wanted to be present in my life. Rachel watched our interaction with obvious discomfort, perhaps finally understanding the contrast between the relationship she'd abandoned and the one I'd found. "Marcus is being promoted to head the Western Regional Healthcare Network," Rachel explained to Sarah, her professional composure returning as she shifted into business mode. "He's looking to establish partnerships with financial consulting firms, and David's company has impressed the corporate leadership." "That sounds like an incredible opportunity," Sarah said genuinely. Her response focused on what this could mean for my professional growth rather than the obvious complications of working with my ex-wife's new husband. "The healthcare industry needs more specialized financial expertise, especially for rural and underserved communities." Her ability to see past the personal drama to the professional merits of the opportunity. It was characteristic of Sarah's approach to complex situations, always looking for the constructive elements rather than getting mired in emotional complications. But I could also see her quick intelligence processing the implications of this unexpected development. "It is a significant opportunity," I acknowledged, looking directly at Rachel as I continued. "But it's also incredibly presumptuous for you. To think you can insert yourself back into my life through business connections after the way you ended our marriage? Some bridges can't be rebuilt, Rachel, especially when they were burned so deliberately." Rachel's professional facade cracked again, revealing genuine distress at my rejection of what she clearly viewed as a generous offer. "I understand you're angry about how things ended between us," she said, her voice carrying a plaintive quality I'd never heard before. "But David, this isn't about our past relationship. This is about your professional future and the opportunity to build something meaningful. Everything about this is connected to our past relationship," I replied firmly, surprised by the clarity and conviction in my own voice. "You can't separate business from personal when you're the one making the introduction. You can't abandon someone during their darkest hour and then expect to facilitate their brightest opportunities. It doesn't work that way." Sarah squeezed my hand supportively, her presence providing the strength and confidence I needed to articulate boundaries I couldn't have imagined setting months earlier. "Rachel, I think what David is saying is that some opportunities come with costs that make them not worth pursuing," Sarah said gently but firmly. "Professional success that requires compromising personal integrity or emotional well-being isn't really success at all." The wisdom in Sarah's words was both simple and profound, articulating principles I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to express clearly. She understood that my healing required maintaining clear boundaries with people who had demonstrated their inability to respect or support me, regardless of what practical benefits they might offer. "I see," Rachel said quietly, perhaps finally beginning to understand that her betrayal had consequences that extended beyond our marriage into any future relationship we might have. "I suppose I hoped that enough time had passed for us to work together professionally, but I understand if that's not possible." "It's not about time, Rachel," I said with finality that surprised even me. "It's about trust and respect and basic human decency. Prove that you're incapable of those things when it matters most. I'm not interested in finding out if you've changed because I don't need anything from you anymore." As Rachel gathered her things to leave, clearly understanding that our conversation was over, Sarah remained beside me with steady support and quiet pride in my ability to maintain healthy boundaries. Her presence had transformed what could have been a difficult confrontation into an opportunity to demonstrate the growth and strength I'd achieved through our relationship. "Take care of yourself, David," Rachel said as she prepared to leave, her words carrying what might have been genuine regret. "I truly hope you continue to find happiness." Her farewell felt final in a way that our divorce hadn't, marking the end of any possibility that our past would intrude on my future. "I already have," I replied, looking at Sarah with gratitude and love that needed no explanation. "I found exactly what I needed when I stopped looking for it in the wrong places." My words were both a declaration to Rachel and a promise to Sarah, expressing commitment to the life we were building together. Part 5. The New Beginning 2 years later. I stood in the backyard of our new house in Evanston, watching Sarah plant herbs in the garden we'd designed together. The spring sunlight filtered through the oak trees we'd fallen in love with during our house hunt, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the freshly turned soil. This moment felt like the culmination of a journey I never could have imagined when I was lying in that hospital bed, abandoned and broken. The house itself represented everything we'd built together, chosen not for its size or status, but for its potential to become a true home. We'd spent months searching for the right place, looking for something that felt peaceful and welcoming. With space for Sarah's extensive book collection and a home office where I could work on the consulting business that had grown beyond anything I'd dreamed possible. "Basil should be ready by the time we host your sister's birthday dinner," Sarah called out, brushing dirt from her hands with the satisfied expression she wore after completing any project. Her joy in simple domestic tasks was infectious, transforming ordinary weekend activities into celebrations of the life we were creating together. Every shared meal, every home improvement project, every quiet evening reading in the same room felt like a gift I'd never take for granted. Morrison and Associates had flourished in ways that exceeded everyone's expectations, particularly after we'd declined Rachel's business opportunity and instead built our reputation through authentic relationships with healthcare organizations across the Midwest. The decision to reject that potential partnership had been vindicated when 3 other major healthcare networks approached us independently, drawn by our genuine expertise rather than personal connections. "James called this morning with news about the Minnesota project," I said, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs we'd positioned to catch the morning sun. "The Rural Clinic Network wants to expand the program to include mental health services. It's exactly the kind of comprehensive care approach you've been advocating for in your veteran work." Sarah's volunteer work with disabled veterans had evolved into a formal consulting role, helping the VA system improve their physical rehabilitation programs. Her insights about holistic healing, addressing emotional trauma alongside physical injury, had gained recognition throughout the healthcare community. Watching her passion project develop into professional influence was one of my greatest sources of pride. "That's wonderful," Sarah said, her face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "Mental health integration is crucial for long-term recovery success. Too many patients get physically healed, but never address the psychological impact of their injuries or illnesses." Her understanding of the connections between mind and body had informed not just her professional work but my own healing process, helping me recognize that emotional recovery was as important as physical rehabilitation. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, friends and family gathering for an impromptu barbecue that had become our signature way of entertaining. Lisa arrived first with her children, followed by James and his wife, then several colleagues. From both our workplaces, these casual gatherings had become precious to us, opportunities to celebrate the community we'd built around our relationship. "Uncle David, watch me climb the oak tree," my nephew called out, scrambling up the sturdy branches with the fearless energy of childhood. His confidence reminded me of my own recovery process, the gradual return of trust in my body's capabilities, after surgery had taught me to doubt them. Sarah had helped me rediscover that same fearless approach to life. "Be careful, but have fun," I called back. Words that could have described my entire philosophy since meeting Sarah. She'd taught me to take calculated risks, to remain open to new experiences, while protecting what mattered most. Her influence had made me braver in every aspect of life, from professional opportunities to emotional vulnerability. James pulled me aside during the afternoon, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd watched a friend overcome tremendous obstacles. "You know, David, I've been thinking about how different you are now compared to 2 years ago," he said thoughtfully. "Back then, you were so focused on what you'd lost with Rachel that you couldn't see what was possible. Now you're building something better than you ever had before." His observation was particularly meaningful because James had known me through every phase of my relationship with Rachel, had watched me struggle with the growing distance between us, and had been there during the devastation of her abandonment. His perspective on my transformation carried the weight of long-time friendship and careful observation. "Sarah changed everything," I admitted, watching her across the yard as she helped organize an impromptu soccer game with the visiting children. "Not because she fixed what was broken, but because she showed me what healthy love actually looks like. I didn't know what I was missing until I found it." The evening wound down with Sarah and me cleaning up together, moving around our kitchen with the synchronized efficiency of people who genuinely enjoyed taking care of their shared space. These domestic moments had become some of my favorites. Simple activities that felt meaningful because we were doing them together. "I have something I want to show you," I said, reaching into my pocket for the small velvet box I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. "Actually, something I want to ask you." My voice carried nervous excitement despite months of certainty about this decision. Sarah's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding as I knelt beside her chair, the ring catching the soft light from our kitchen window. "Sarah Williams, you saved my life in more ways than I can count," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was asking. "You taught me to walk again, to trust again, to hope again. Will you marry me?" Her response was immediate, and joyful tears streaming down her face as she nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Absolutely, yes, she said, pulling me up to kiss her properly. I love you, David. I love the man you are and the man you're becoming, and the life we're building together. As we held each other in our kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the home we'd created, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Rachel's abandonment had felt like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning of something far better. The surgery that was supposed to fix my spine had ended up healing my entire life, leading me to a woman whose love was steady, genuine, and transformative. The titanium rods in my back would always be there, a permanent reminder of vulnerability overcome. But Sarah's presence in my life was proof that sometimes the most painful experiences clear the way for the most beautiful discoveries. My wife had abandoned me during surgery, but her colleague had become my new reason to live, love, and believe in the possibility of genuine happiness. The future stretched ahead of us, filled with possibilities I couldn't have imagined during those dark days in the hospital. Plans for a wedding that would celebrate authentic love, professional goals that felt achievable with Sarah's support, and the quiet joy of building a life with someone who chose to be present every single day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.